Well, let's take you now to Brussels, where European leaders are speaking after 4 days of talks on the coronavirus recovery package. There, you're listening now to European Council President Charles Michel. Let's have a listen to what he's saying.
Collective responsibility and solidarity. And we show also our belief in our common future. And this agreement sends a concrete signal that Europe is a force for action. We negotiated about money, but of course, it's about a lot more than money. It's about workers and families, their jobs, their health, and their well-being. I believe this agreement will be seen as a pivotal moment in Europe's journey, but it will also launch us into the future. In fact, it's the first time in European history that our budget will be clearly linked to our climate objectives. The first time that the respect for rule of law is a decisive criteria for budget spending. And the first time that you are jointly reinforcing our economies against a crisis. Nous avons décidé de soutenir un budget pour les 7 prochaines années à concurrence de 1074 milliards d'euros. Nous avons décidé de mobiliser...
Well, you've been listening there to European Council President Charles Michel. He's speaking now after 4 days and 4 nights of marathon, often acrimonious talks. Leaders at the EU have finally clinched a deal on a multi-billion-dollar coronavirus rescue fund. Now, that recovery package, we understand, will provide almost $860 billion in grants and loans to counter the effects of the recession that we've been seeing set in. There had been huge divisions over just how much of this package should be loans, how much should take the form of grants that don't need to be repaid. They finally agreed, and that was a unanimous decision that was agreed in the early hours of this morning. Well, we can now speak to our correspondent, Step Vasson. She joins me on the phone now from Amsterdam. Step, 4 days, 4 nights of infighting, finally a deal. Can you talk us through just what's been agreed here?
Yes, finally they have this 27 signatures, and it was indeed a long and dramatic summit, more than 4 days and nights, as you say. But it is a deal, a historic deal, and it will also strengthen the economic strength of the European Union. And that's, of course, the reason why the countries were very keen to sign the deal, although it was very, very difficult. 750 billion euros for this massive aid package, and it will go mostly to the countries who were affected the most in the south of Europe, mostly Italy, of course, and Spain.
Steph, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We will come back to you shortly. But Charles Michel is speaking in English in Brussels, and we're going to listen into that, and we'll come back to you shortly. Thanks.
Have been hit by an unprecedented crisis. I think 600,000 dead was the last figures I saw a few hours ago. This crisis continues and will continue to affect people, families, women, children. As political leaders, we have responsibilities. We have a democratic mandate, which we all share, and we have to answer that challenge by showing that we're able to deal with these through concrete, real results and through decisions, concrete decisions, not virtual decisions. A decision which will have an impact. It must have an impact, a positive impact, so that we can move towards the future and meet our challenges. Thank you.
Madam President.
Merci beaucoup, mesdames et messieurs. Je voudrais tout d'abord remercier.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking the President of the Council, Charles Michel, for his really hard work and his tremendous perseverance, because the success of this European Council is his success as well. I'd like to thank Angela Merkel for her exceptional guidance. We spent 4 long days and nights of negotiation, more than 90 hours, but it was worth it. This agreement is a signal that Europe is able to act. Now, in German, after all, people often accused Europe as being too little too late, whereas here we're demonstrating that the opposite is the case. At the end of April, the European Council gave us the mandate of designing a recovery package, and today, only 2 months later, Next Generation Europe is up and running, and it has the agreement of the European Council. And in the history of the European Union, that is an absolute record for a new budgetary instrument. And Next Generation Europe is very extensive, more than 1.8 trillion euros, and that's more than 5% of the GDP of the EU 27. Europe still has the courage and the imagination to think big. And in so doing, we are fully aware that this is a historic moment in Europe. We are currently in one of the most difficult economic and health crises, but nonetheless, Europe is managing, having worked really hard to tackle this crisis in a really effective way. And this will benefit the EU budget, and it will link solidarity with responsibility. Solidarity because all 27 countries together bear and support Next Generation EU, and responsibility because Next Generation EU doesn't just point the way out of the crisis, but also it serves as the very foundation of a modern and sustainable Europe.
I want to emphasize 2 more points. We have now the new own resources tightly linked to the repayment. This is a big step forward with a clear timetable. Member States will benefit as they will contribute less to repay the investments, and the new own resources will strengthen the European Union also in the long term. I'm glad that we managed to safeguard this achievement during the whole negotiations. And Europe's recovery will be green. The new budget will power the European Green Deal. It will accelerate the digitalization of Europe's economy. Thanks to Next Generation EU, national reforms will be boosted. We invest in Europe's future. And finally, unlike in previous crises, this time member states have not opted for an intergovernmental agreement, but they have entrusted the European Commission of Europe's recovery. We will together manage a total of 1.8 trillion euro. The bulk of the money will be channeled through the programs in which the European Parliament is involved. Next Generation EU comes with a great responsibility, and we are determined to bring about reforms and investment in Europe. Nevertheless, I must also mention a difficult point. In their search for compromise, leaders have made far-reaching adjustments into the new MFF and Next Generation EU, for example, in health, migration, external action, InvestEU. They have not taken up the solvency instrument. This is regrettable. It decreases the innovative part of the budget, even if more than 50% of the overall budget, MFF and Next Generation EU, will support modern policies. And so finally, to conclude, Europe as a whole has now a big chance to come out stronger from the crisis. Today we've taken a historic step we can be all proud of. But another important step remains ahead of us. First and foremost, we now have to work with the European Parliament to secure agreement. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but tonight is a big step forward towards recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. We'll be taking a couple of questions. And first on is David Carretta. David.
Merci, David Carretta, Radio Radicale.
Thank you, David Carretta, Radio Radicale. So it was mission impossible. Initial proposals the Commission and you yourself had. Did you sacrifice the rule of law at the altar of compromise? And secondly, for President von der Leyen. With so little money, will you be able to carry through your products? 100 billion less in the recovery plan and through the European budget. Which generation, if any, is going to get this? Well, I'll try to cover both points, says President Michel, to start with. On the rule of law, we are fully determined, and this is the first time in the history of Europe that there is this link between governance and mobilization of funds and the rule of law and mobilization of funds. We've shown that the Council works on a qualified majority. It's very early in the morning. When you've had more time to read the details, you'll see how ambitious this compromise is. Around the table, people spoke frankly, looked at each other in the eyes, and tackled this issue to progress our common values, move them forward, move governance forward. I reaffirm this was ambitious, and this was an ambitious decision. And then on the amounts, can I also say that this is the first time this European project we've negotiated such a big financial package. People are giving the impression that there aren't many resources. No, there's 1.74 trillion and then 750 billion in the recovery, which together add up to something that is very substantial. We talk about our ambitions, but you have to look at what the MFF contains to deal with short, medium and long-term strategic challenges. With this massive injection of boost, the 750 billion euros to help economic recovery, but also to help transform this European project. COVID-19 has hit us, but even before, the Commission, Parliament and the Council had thought that it was time to relaunch and transform Europe with climate change at the heart of it, and 30% of the MFF and the Recovery Fund have to be tied to these climate ambitions. And we've followed up on what we intended to do before this all started, and I say with great conviction that these decisions we've taken today will transform in a long-term way the face of Europe.
To the questions, the text that has been agreed on the rule of law has improved. It's a very clear, in the document, a very clear commitment to the rule of law and a very clear commitment to the protection of the financial interests of the Union. And this is linked, against this background, to the fact that the Commission has proposed an instrument under which, in case of breaches, measures will be adopted. So there's a very clear link, a reference. The adopting or the voting will be by qualified majority voting. And finally, we will also introduce instruments to strengthen the controls of the EU funds. So there is more clarity, there is more distinction in the text, and a very clear reference, which was important not only to the rule of law, but also to the protection of the financial interests of the Union. And what the overall package is concerned, and your question on the priorities for the European Union, it is an unprecedented size and scope of package that we have, 1.8 trillion. And the importance here is that the whole next generation EU package of 750 billion is composed in a way that the national recovery plans will be aligned with the European priorities. That is the European Green Deal, that is the digitization, and that is resilience, transmitted through the country-specific recommendations. So we have a very strong tool now that we can work together with the member states on not only the recovery, but at the same time, through the investment, leap forward into a more sustainable, a greener and more digitized future we want to build with a modern single market. So this is a unique opportunity to modernize the European Union.
Thank you. Next question is for David Hersenhorn from Politico.
Thank you very much, Berend. Good morning, President. President Michel, I wonder if you could address the concern that President von der Leyen just raised, calling it regrettable that leaders had to cut some of the most innovative parts of the MFF. Also that you had to persist in the rebates, which some people feel are sort of a budget gimmick in getting agreement here. And if there was a moment in this for you, President Michel, when throughout this summit, what was the key moment when you had a deal? And for President von der Leyen, a lot of this package obviously will be in national plans. The grants was the issue of disagreement. To your mind, how do you envision member states best using these grants in concrete ways? Obviously, it's not like rebuilding from an earthquake or from a war. It's a different type of recovery. In a concrete way, what do you envision the best national recovery plans might look like? Thank you.
There is a very strong political will around the table of the European Council to act in order to deliver, because we are convinced that climate change, that innovation, that the support for the circular economy, for example, is key to develop a very strong program. And with this decision, the MFF and the Recovery Fund, we have the tools, we have the means in order to tackle those important challenges for the future. It's also important to observe that this package is huge if you compare to the size of the European GDP. Also important not to forget that the recovery strategy will also be developed at the national level. It means that as European Union, we send a very strong signal. We are solid, we are robust, and we are united. And more than ever, we need to be united, and we need to be strong in order to face this huge crisis.
So, to your question, concerning the part how I envisage to make sure that the investment goes in the right direction. The program the Recovery and Resilience Facility is established in a way that is very clear. First of all, it's voluntary. So member states can choose to come forward with a national recovery plan, but it has to be aligned with the European semester and the country-specific recommendations. And the country-specific recommendations address the weaknesses or deficiencies in member states that should be improved, where things should be reformed. And they were always very interesting, but did not always have the necessary effect in the member states, because it was up to them to implement them or not. Now, this instrument has a new punch, because the European semester is now connected to an enormous amount of grants or potentially loans. So there's way more punch behind the country-specific recommendations and the necessity to respect the principles of the European Green Deal and of the digitization, as I said, the priorities of the European Union. We can make sure that this will be implemented in a proper way, because there will be milestones where you have a look whether the milestones have been reached, and then the necessary investment, the payments will be dispersed. So there's a very clear plan to have both two goals. On the one hand, the recovery of the member state, but on the other hand, to make sure that it's at the same time a modernization of the member states.
Thank you. Next question is for Sam Fleming from the Financial Times.
Yes, good morning. Could I follow up on the question on, please, on rebates? The clearly the rebates were not only maintained from previous drafts, but they were actually increased. Were the frugal states in these discussions effectively trading their support for higher grants in exchange for higher rebates? Were you disappointed that that was the outcome that you saw, given the Commission has previously been recommending that rebates be phased out? And do you think rebates now, these high rebates, are basically here to stay? Thank you.
We took a decision today for the next MFF and for the recovery fund. In the framework of this decision, we took also some decisions related to the rebates. We face a big crisis. I repeat again, and I think that what's important is the fact that we find the way in order to take a very strong decision. And indeed, the rebate is not a surprise. When I expressed the idea a few weeks ago that we would need to tackle different building blocks, I expressed the idea that the rebate would be part of the global package, of the global decision. You know, at the level of the European Council, it's very difficult. We need to decide by unanimity. And that's why it's important to show respect for each other. That's why it's important also to be able at the same time to take strong and courageous decisions. And that's what we did today. And I remember only a few hours ago maybe, and certainly the last days, there was this global impression that it would be impossible mission, but we did it. And it's very important. We were able to take the decision. We are united, and we sent the message, Europe is strong.
Next question is for Lily Bayer, please. Lily?
Thank you very much. Question, which is for both presidents. Today is not really the end of the saga because, of course, you still need to convince the European Parliament and national parliaments to sign off on this deal. So I was wondering if you could both maybe talk a little bit about how you plan to convince legislators to sign off, especially because we're already seeing some members of the European Parliament raising concerns about certain elements of your package. Thank you.
We show respect for the important role of the European Parliament. And as you know, we had many consultations, many contacts with the European Parliament the last weeks, the last months. And of course, we will have the occasion to maintain the discussions with the members of the European Parliament. And it's key for the European democratic process, of course. And at the same time, you are right, we need also to show respect for the responsibility of the national parliaments. I mean, today, there is a strong signal, there is a strong message. Why? Because 27 heads of states and heads of governments, they took the decision to act together. And they are responsible before their own national parliaments. I know that probably because it's the democratic process, it will be difficult. It will mean that we will need to explain what are the arguments, what are the reasons for our decision. We are transparent. It's also very essential for this democratic process. And I'm really convinced that with political will, with political courage, with a constant dialogue, it will be possible to implement what we have decided today.
Well, indeed, from tomorrow on...
Well, you've been listening there to EU leaders speaking in Brussels after 4 days and 4 nights of tense talks about their budget, which this time includes a deal for a nearly $860 billion pandemic rescue package. Now, this was also the first in-person meeting since the start of the pandemic, and there's been huge division over how much of that money would be grants versus loans, as well as whether EU funding should be linked to the rule of law. We've been hearing from Charles Michel, the President of the European Council, and Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. They statement reiterating the unity and solidarity of the EU, both describing it as a next-generation European Union, especially an emphasis on green investments as they focus on their attempted economic recovery. Well, let's now speak to our correspondent, Step Vassen. She joins me now on the phone from Amsterdam. Step, after more than 90 hours of negotiation, as von der Leyen was saying there, we finally have a deal, a historic deal. Can you talk us through what's been agreed here?
Yes, you heard the word mission impossible several times, of course, during this press conference, and it is indeed a big victory for the European Council President, Charles Michel, because the future of the EU as a unity was basically hanging in his hands. It is, of course, a very important sign that all the 27 countries have signed this deal, because if it would have not, if it would have failed, it would have been dramatic, of course, for the European Union. And at the end, it's a compromise. There was a long battle for 4 days and 4 nights about how this money would be divided. It was a large grant package initially before the talks started, but now most of half of this package is going to be loans and half of it is still going to be grants, but with strict conditions. And this is a win for the so-called frugal four countries, the smaller northern European countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark and Austria, who have pushed a lot for these strict conditions tied to the loans, to the grants, because they were afraid that, like what happened in the past economic crisis, like in 2008, lots of money would be dispersed and they would have no control over it. And the countries here, the Netherlands specifically, is very much afraid that the Dutch taxpayers are paying too much, that money is going to be misspent. So they have this kind of emergency brake that they agreed on, that if a country is not spending the money in the right way, that the other countries can intervene and can stop the disbursement of the money. So this is an important win for the smaller countries, and it was dramatic because they were in a conflict with France and Germany, the big EU countries, and there were dramatic moments when Emmanuel Macron was already starting his plane in the last couple of days, pretending that he was going to leave, but he wasn't at the last moment. So there was a lot of drama in this summit. But as I said, it was so important for the 27 countries of the EU to make this deal. There was also a compromise on this rule of law agreement, as you heard in the press conference. Hungary and Poland were very much against a tightening of this money to the country's rule of law. And also the smaller countries were protesting against it. They wanted that countries need to prove that they have this rule of law before they get any money. And then they were referring to Poland and Hungary. So they made a compromise on that. But as Charles Michel in the press conference said, he was still very pleased with the outcome, and all the details will make that clear. So it is a historic moment here and a historic outcome of this summit.
Step, as you say, it's definitely a compromise, and certain richer countries still are very unhappy about this idea of shared debt. But I believe we're now looking at a first for the EU, selling collective bonds and then giving the proceeds in grants. I mean, is that a precedent for how things could work going forward?
Definitely, it is the first, and it's of course a huge package of money. We're talking in total about 1.8 trillion euros, and a lot of it will be borrowed on the financial capital markets here in Europe, which is also the first method to do it this way. And there is this shared responsibility. Yes, it is the first, and that's why, of course, the European leaders were so talking about victory. It is difficult, but it's also a very difficult time. Everyone, the countries are also facing this economic recession due to the COVID-19 crisis. So there was this feeling that they had to act now, and if not, there would be a huge crisis coming up in the next couple of years. And of course, we still have to see if this is going to be enough to prevent this from happening, because Spain, Italy, Greece, they're all struggling deeply. So this is going to be a huge test also for the European Union to see if they can actually do this all together.
Step, you talked about some of the drama that we've seen over the last few days. I mean, this was the longest EU summit since, by my count, Nice back in 2000. We saw some frayed tempers, gloves, even masks coming off. And it felt like it really illustrated the divisions that we've seen emerge during this pandemic and also during Brexit. So where does this leave the whole European project now?
Yes, it was very dramatic. As I said, there were moments that there were fists banged on the table. Especially the Dutch Prime Minister was very much criticized and name-called. He was called Mr. No-No and bad guy and Mr. Stingy because he played hardball in Brussels. He was one of the leaders of this movement that went against the majority of the European Union, who actually wanted a much more to show more solidarity, as they said, to the southern countries. So there was this divide, and it was very painful because Italy, for example, and Spain, they felt left behind. They felt like northern countries didn't want to help them in this very difficult crisis. And, of course, nobody asked for COVID-19, and you can't be blamed for being affected by it. So it became very emotional. But the fact that they actually got out of it is definitely a good sign. And I think that will definitely strengthen the mood in the EU, which was already at a very low point because when they were dealing with COVID-19, every single country was doing their own thing. They had their own policy. So there was not much of a unity. And hopefully now they will show that they actually do need each other.
Well, we'll be bringing you all the details of that historic deal in the coming hours here on Al Jazeera. Our correspondent, Step Vassen, there, speaking to us from Amsterdam. Thank you, Step.